10 drones did something that shouldn't have been possible. They penetrated the densest air defense network on Earth. Flying so low they could kiss power lines, these Ukrainian shadows slipped 625 kilometers into Russian territory. Their target? A facility that didn't officially exist. Until now, they were invisible. Then, at 1449, everything changed. A Russian pilot felt it before his instruments confirmed it. Something was out there. What happened next rewrote the physics of modern warfare, and it all came down to a simple trick with a propeller. The Su-35's radar was state-of-the-art, 20 kilowatts of pure dedication power that could spot a fighter jet 250 kilometers away. But these weren't fighter jets, they were Phantoms. Each one's signature 50 times smaller than what the radar was designed to track. 10 contacts flickering in and out of existence. Then the pilot noticed something strange. The propellers, spinning at 7,400 RPM, they created a heartbeat in the radar return, a distinctive pulse that screamed drone louder than any visual could. The pilot's thumb found the weapons release. 18 kilometers. The missiles would close that gap in 13 seconds. But 13 seconds is an eternity when you know what's coming. And the drones, they knew. They did something that shouldn't have worked. They cut their engines. Instantly, 10 solid contacts became nothing. The missiles were already committed. They were now hunting for ghosts. Here's the physics that saved them. At 50 meters altitude, every radar pulse bounces off the ground, creating a mirror image. The missile sees two targets, one real, one ghost. The computer has 0.3 seconds to choose. It uses signal strength, but the ghost, reinforced by ground reflection, often appears stronger. The missile chooses wrong. The first missile slammed into an enemy field. The pilot watched his million-dollar weapon create a crater of nothing. But one drone had betrayed its companions. Drone 3 climbed to 500 meters, engines at full power, a deliberate sacrifice. The fireball meant one hit in exchange for letting 8 escape. Heroes aren't just human. 3 seconds to restart engines. 2, 1. The distinctive whine returned as 9 shadows leveled off at 45 meters. They'd scattered across a 12-kilometer front. The math was against the pilot. 9 targets, 12 kilometers of separation, fuel for one more pass. He needed 3 minutes to re-engage. They'd be 15 kilometers further by then. His jaw clenched as they disappeared into ground clutter. Behind him, his wingman was being vectored to intercept, but the drones had bought themselves time with altitude and sacrifice. 9 shadows pressed east, engines humming against the sky. They traded 400 meters of altitude and one companion for passage through the first layer. But in just 73 minutes, they would face something that couldn't be outmaneuvered. But they didn't know that yet. At 1538, the 9 survivors reached Bryansk Oblast in perfect formation. 500 meters spacing, 75 meters altitude, maintaining 290 kilometers per hour through the agricultural flatlands. The terrain here was a navigator's nightmare. Endless identical fields with no distinguishing features, perfect for getting lost. That's exactly why the Russians had positioned their most sophisticated electronic warfare assets along this corridor. The first sign of trouble was subtle. The lead drone's GPS receiver showed 12 satellites locked, strong signals across the board. Then 11. Then 7. Then nothing. Not a gradual fade like flying out of range, but an instant electronic blackout. The Russians had sprung their trap. The system you see mounted on these 4 MT-LB armored vehicles arranged in a precise diamond pattern is called a Borisoglebsk tube. Each one is pumping 100 watts of precisely tuned interference across the electromagnetic spectrum, and it was wreaking havoc on the drones. To understand what's going on here, consider the numbers. GPS satellites whisper at 0.025 watts from 20,000 kilometers away. Signals so faint, they're below the background noise floor. The Borisoglebsk was screaming at 100 watts from 8 kilometers. That's not just jamming. That's electromagnetic brutality. 4,000 times stronger than the signal it was destroying. The drone's navigation screens went dark. 8 kilometers to the north, a Moskva 1 electronic intelligence system was listening with the patience of a wolf spider. 3 antenna arrays arranged in a perfect triangle, each one synchronized to nanosecond precision via atomic clocks. The system wasn't transmitting. That would give away its position. It was waiting for the drones to make a mistake. The math behind direction finding is both elegant and lethal. When a signal arrives at multiple antennas, it reaches one at slightly different times. A signal reaching station A 1 microsecond before station B means the emitter is precisely 300 meters closer to A. 3 stations create 3 time differences. 3 time differences create 2 hyperbolic curves. Where those curves intersect, that's your target. Accurate to 50 meters at 40 kilometers range. 8 drones maintained perfect discipline. No transmissions, no active sensors. They were flying on pure inertial navigation now. Mechanical gyroscopes spinning freely, accumulating error at 10 degrees per hour. At 3 hours of flight, that meant 300 meters of drift. By Penza, they could miss the entire facility. Something has to change now, or this mission was doomed to fail. The lead drone's processor was running the numbers, mission success probability dropping, abort threshold approaching. It made a calculation that would cost its life, but saved the mission. At 15:41, it broke radio silence. The transmission lasted exactly 2 seconds. GPS request, position update, formation sync. 2 seconds of electromagnetic screaming in the enforced silence. The Moskva 1 operator's screens lit up like a Christmas tree. The targeting data flashed to 3 S-300 batteries in milliseconds. The battery commanders didn't need to ask questions. They had a position, they had authorization, and they had 6 missiles in the air within 8 seconds. The 48 N6 missiles accelerated to Mach 5.5, 2 kilometers per second. They'd reach the coordinates in just 40 seconds. But the lead drone was already executing its plan perfectly. Bank left 45 degrees, maintained for 10 seconds, climbed to 200 meters while transmitting continuously. It was painting itself across every scope in Western Russia, an electromagnetic sacrifice that would save 8 others. The missiles arrived at empty air, their proximity fuses finding nothing but the ghost of a signal that had already moved. The 180-kilogram warheads detonated in sequence. Shrapnel peppered empty fields. Meanwhile, 8 drones had received the previous navigation update. INS errors corrected. Position confirmed. They pressed east in perfect radio silence while their leader flew north, transmitting continuously, drawing every missile in the oblast. The Moskva 1 operators watched their screens in frustration. One bright target moving north, broadcasting like a beacon, but they knew there had been more. The electromagnetic silence from the east was too perfect, too deliberate. Behind them, 6 more missiles found the lead drone, then 4, then 12. The Russians were taking no chances with the decoy. The operator watched the signal disappear in a burst of static. 1 more Ukrainian drone destroyed, but something felt wrong. 8 shadows continued east at 45 meters, their navigation true again thanks to 2 seconds of sacrifice. They thought they were invisible now, gliding through the electronic darkness. They had no idea that 12 kilometers away, a completely different detection system had been tracking them for the last 6 minutes. One that didn't need radio waves at all. At 1600 hours, the 8 survivors entered Penza Oblast like ghosts. 30 meters altitude, engines throttled back to minimum sustainable RPM, barely sipping fuel. They defeated fighters, they'd survived jamming, and now they were invisible. No radar emissions, no radio signals, just mechanical whispers. That's what made the first missile launch so shocking. The 9M338 erupted from a forest clearing with no warning, no radar lock, no targeting laser, nothing. Just the sudden roar of rocket motors and the terrible knowledge that somehow, impossibly, the Russians knew exactly where they were. The system you see here is called a 1B75 Penicillin acoustic reconnaissance system, and it had been listening for the last 12 minutes. Originally designed to locate enemy artillery by the sound of their guns, Penicillin represents a completely different mode of detection. 8 microphones arranged in a precise geometric pattern, each one sensitive enough to hear a helicopter at 7 kilometers or a drone at 12. But it's not just listening, it's calculating. Sound travels at 343 meters per second. That's the key to everything. When a drone's engine's definitive whine reaches the array, each microphone records a slightly different arrival time. The leftmost sensor hears it first, then 0.03 seconds later, the next one, then 0.02 seconds after that. The computer takes those time differences and runs them through the same triangulation math submarines use to track ships. 16,000 samples per second, building a three-dimensional map of every sound source in its zone. But here's what made Penicillin lethal against these specific drones. Every engine has an acoustic fingerprint, a fundamental frequency plus harmonics that identify it like DNA. The Chinese engines in these Ukrainian drones run at exactly 7,400 RPM. The system had been trained on captured drones. It knew that signature better than the operators knew their own heartbeats. All that was left to do was pass it on to a firing unit. The Tor M2 battery commander had a choice: launch with radar guidance to reveal his position, or trust the acoustic data and fire blind. He chose option 2. The first missile left the launcher a minute later, accelerating to Mach 2.5 in 3 seconds, flying purely on the coordinates Penicillin provided. For 13 seconds, it flew in complete electromagnetic silence. The drone's radar warning receivers showed nothing. The first warning was the sound, that distinctive rocket roar getting louder. Then, at 2 kilometers from the predicted intercept point, the missile's radar suddenly went active. 2 seconds. That's all the warning they had. At 290 kilometers per hour, 2 seconds means traveling 160 meters. The lead drone pilot's reflexes kicked in. Maximum performance climb, 3 Gs pulling at the airframe. The wings flexed, composite material groaning. Any harder and they'd snap like twigs. The proximity fuse triggered at 47 meters. The warhead was designed to take out helicopters. 3,500 tungsten cubes expelled in a precisely calculated pattern. Each fragment traveled at 21 meters per second. The lead drone transformed into aluminum confetti in a third of a second. But its fate saved the others. The second missile, launching 5 seconds later, found its target scattering. The drones were executing random throttle changes now. 50% power, then 100%, then 70%, then 40%. The constantly changing engine notes destroyed Penicillin's firing solution. The system needed consistent sound to maintain attack. The Doppler shifts were ruining every calculation. The operator watched his screen in frustration as 7 precise tracks became 7 empty spots. The third missile went active too early. A software glitch, a signal flip bit in memory, triggered radar activation at 4 kilometers instead of 2. That extra 2 seconds of warning was the difference between failure and survival. 3 drones dove to 5 meters over open farmland, accepting the insane risk of collision with power lines that crisscrossed the fields. They skimmed above wheat stubble and irrigation ditches, so low their prop wash picked up dust clouds, and the missile couldn't follow. Its minimum engagement altitude was 10 meters, and at that height difference, its proximity fuse couldn't distinguish between the drones and the ground reflection. It detonated harmlessly above them. The fourth missile found a target, Drone 7, lagging behind after the throttle chaos took a direct hit. 6 survivors pressed east at maximum throttle now. Stealth was pointless. The Russians knew exactly where they were. Speed was their only defense. Every second meant 80 meters closer to target. The math was simple. 47 kilometers remaining, 290 kilometers per hour, 9.7 minutes to impact. The Penicillin operator was already relaying their trajectory to Penza. 6 drones, bearing 247, altitude below 50 meters, speed 290, arrival in 9 minutes. The facility's defenders had just enough time to prepare something special, something that would turn the drone's own sensors against them. At 16:15, 6 Ukrainian drones approached JSC Radiazavad from the southwest. The facility sprawled before them in perfect afternoon clarity. 40 hectares of industrial buildings, parking lots full of cars, even individual windows reflecting sunlight. The day shift was at full production. 300 workers manufacturing the Polyana D4M1 command systems that coordinated Russia's entire Western air defense network. Then, at exactly 800 meters from the perimeter, everything went insane. The facility's last line of defense wasn't guns or missiles. It was a Pol 21 GPS spoofing system, originally designed to protect their nuclear installations. 4 transmitters arranged around the complex, each pumping out 500 watts of fake GPS signals. But this wasn't simple jamming that blocked signals. It was far more sinister. The system was broadcasting perfect GPS data, just for the wrong direction. Every satellite signal showed the drones were actually 3 kilometers south, 500 meters higher, and traveling east instead of north. The navigation computers couldn't tell the difference. The spoof signals were stronger, cleaner, and more precise than the real ones from space. The lead drone's processor detected the anomaly immediately. Visual sensors showed the facility dead ahead. GPS showed empty farmland. Inertial navigation said continue straight. Magnetic compass agreed, but the GPS insisted they needed to turn 90 degrees right, climb 500 meters, and fly away from the target. This created a processing paradox. The flight control system was designed to trust GPS above all else. It was the most accurate, most reliable navigation source. But now, GPS was screaming contradictory commands. Turn right, no, left, climb, descend. The autopilot began oscillating, trying to reconcile impossible data. Worse, the spoofing wasn't consistent. The signals shifted every 3 seconds, showing the drones in different false locations. One movement they were over Penza airport, the next hovering above the Sira River, then somehow inside a mountain that didn't exist. The navigation processor, trying to calculate a route between rapidly changing false positions, began generating random course corrections. This caused the drone's wings to rock left and right like you see here as conflicting commands fought for control. The artificial horizon showed level flight while the visual sensor showed a 30-degree bank. The radar altimeter read 45 meters, while GPS claimed 545 meters. Every instrument disagreed with every other instrument. 5 seconds of this chaos and the drone would tear itself apart or crash into the ground. The other drones behind were entering the same trap, their flight paths beginning to diverge wildly as each processor tried to solve unsolvable navigation equations. The drone made the only choice it could: trust the plan, maintain heading, maintain altitude, fly blind, and hope. The drone finally corrected itself over Building 3. Pure luck. With 200 meters of INS drift, it could have emerged anywhere, but its optical camera locked onto the distinctive roof of the Polyana D4M1 assembly building. The processor ran the numbers: 47-degree dive angle, 97 meters per second impact velocity. The shaped charge would penetrate exactly 40 millimeters of steel, but the crucial vulnerability was the junction between steel roof and concrete walls. Impact at 1620. The explosion ripped through the assembly floor, but more importantly, it ruptured 3 chemical storage tanks: trichloroethylene for degreasing, acetone for cleaning, hydrogen peroxide for etching. The mixture created a fuel-air explosion that traveled at 1,800 meters per second, turning the building into an inferno. The second drone could see the explosion, a pillar of smoke rising from below. Fire meant target. It adjusted course toward the flames and dove. Building 7 took a direct hit 20 seconds later. The third, fourth, and fifth drones arrived simultaneously from different vectors, all targeting the heat plume. One hit a transformer station, creating an electromagnetic pulse that crashed every computer within 500 meters. The other 2 struck the component warehouse, igniting 6 months of stored lithium batteries. The sixth and final drone arrived late at 1623. The facility was already an inferno of 1,200-degree flames. It circled once, its camera recording the destruction, then dove into the only building not yet burning. The Polyana D4M1 production line was gone. Without it, Russia's S-300 and S-400 batteries would have to operate independently, with their reaction times tripling, which now meant even more successful missions like this one. Bye for now.